welcome everyone to today's webinar where we're going to spend the next hour or so really diving into how your organization can engage the next generation of supporters to advance your organizational mission. For those who may not be familiar with CanadaHelps, we are Canada's largest online donation and fundraising platform. We call ourselves a charity for all charities. And for Canadians, our website, CanadaHelps.org, is a very convenient, safe, and trusted one-stop destination for donating, fundraising, or learning about any charity in Canada. We actually have the ability for donors to search our website for any cause or any charity they would like to give to and make a very safe and encrypted donation. And for charities, we actually develop very affordable fundraising technology that's used by about 30,000 charities right now, regardless of their size. And that way, all of them have the capacity to succeed in this digital age. And CanadaHelps has been around since 2000. So over that 23-year history, we've actually raised as an organization for charities about $2.8 billion from more than 4.5 million Canadians. So very impressive legacy. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. So for some of you, today is really intended to change your perspective from looking at millennials or Gen Zers, from two generations that are obsessed with endless scrolling on TikTok, to actually two very unique generations that are filled with extremely passionate and caring individuals who are either currently or will be our future leaders and change makers. And for others who already know about the power and the dynamic generations in millennials and Gen Z, we're actually going to dive into how you can leverage some key strategies to engage these next generations. What it comes down to is the need to engage this next generation of donors or supporters when it comes down to the causes we're all working on. And so for this reason, we really need to shift our donor strategy as a sector. And when I say sector, I mean the nonprofit sector, but I recognize that not all of you are coming from this as a nonprofit, but it still applies. So before we get started into some of the nitty-gritty stats, I just wanted to take a moment to let you know that if you're curious about any of the data that I'm going to present today, you can actually go to our website on CanadaHelps.org and just search for something called the Giving Report. And a lot of the information that I'm going over today specifically comes from our 2022 and 2023 Giving Reports. At CanadaHelps, we actually published the first annual Giving Report in 2017, really to provide a snapshot on the giving trends facing the nonprofit sector and to help Canadians understand these trends. So leveraging the vast volume and just the breadth of online giving data that we have at CanadaHelps, as well as the data that we get from Statistics Canada through the tax filer data, we actually can paint a very detailed picture of the trends in how Canadians give. And so every year we actually partner with a couple of really great organizations. Environics Analytics is one, and Imagine Canada is another. And they're both incredibly skilled in supporting us to bringing real depth to this report and allowing us to go deeper every year. And we're so thankful to have them as partners with this. So unfortunately, as this slide shows, to sort of start with the bad news, giving participation rates have been falling for decades. And when we talk about giving participation rates, really what that means is the percent of Canadians who claim charitable donations on their tax returns. So as I mentioned earlier, we leverage Statistics Canada's tax filer data to really help us track that giving participation rate. And while we know that that's not perfect, because it certainly doesn't take into account just the changing patterns of giving, specifically things like giving of time as a volunteer, or giving of goods like donating to a food bank, for example, or donating clothing, buying some of the lottery tickets for hospital foundations where you don't get a receipt, or even crowdfunding. None of that is actually included in the tax filer data, because a lot of that activity is not tax receivable. However, we do know that leveraging the tax filer data is kind of an indicator that has been tracked for years. And so that's why we have to really rely on that. We also know that awareness by Canadians of charitable tax credits is very high. So our past research has indicated that about 74% of Canadians who report having made a charitable donation in the last year also reported having claimed that donation on their tax returns. So, excuse me, we know that that's an important benefit to Canadians, to be able to make a charitable donation and get a tax benefit in return. So in terms of the percentage of Canadians giving, as this slide shows, in 1990, and I just want to make sure, yeah, in 1990, it was at 29.5%, and that's in terms of tax filers who reported making donations. By 2010, you can see that it dropped to 23.4%, and in 2020, it had dropped to 18.4%. So that's a pretty alarming 11.1 percentage point drop in 30 years, with almost half of that drop, which is 5 percentage points, in the last 10 years alone. So since the launch of the Giving Report, CanadaHelps has continued to raise concerns about the giving gap. So you might be asking, what is the giving gap? So that refers to the gap between giving by older Canadians and younger Canadians, and the need to ensure that younger Canadians are ready to step up when today's core older donors are no longer able to give. And what we see is that the amount given has only seen significant growth in the last 10 years from Canadians 55 years and older. So while there is a smaller share of Canadians aged 55 plus, those that are giving more. What's happening, though, is giving is falling to a smaller group of older Canadians. And the question really is, what will happen when those older Canadians are no longer able to give? So the minimal growth from this age group between 2019 and 2020 from the data is very concerning. In terms of the number of Canadians giving, we are overall seeing giving participation rates decline almost across the board. So as you can see, and hopefully it's not too small, giving by Canadians aged 25 to 34, which kind of straddles the Gen Z to millennials cohort, dropped from 17.6% in 2010 to 11.9% in 2020. And giving by Canadians aged 35 to 54, which is really that sweet spot of millennials and younger Gen Xers, that dropped from 25.3% in 2010 to 19% in 2020. And even amongst those aged 55 plus, which is straddling the Gen Xers and boomers, giving has dropped from 30% in 2010 to 23.8% in 2020. So in terms of the good news, because I don't want to leave you or start this off just with bad news, in terms of the good news, we are seeing a slight improvement in giving participation rates by Canadians under 25 years of age. But the same is not true for those aged 25 to 34, 35 to 54, and 55 plus and older, where we see a drop of 5+ percentage points respectively. So you're likely saying at this point, how and why should I be prioritizing younger Canadians when they are giving comparatively little? How can I make time for building relationships for the future with younger people when I'm challenged just to raise what we need today. So, one of the interesting correlations that we found at CanadaHelps is that charities that report that they are now raising less than they did pre-pandemic note steeper declines in engagement rates among younger Canadians when you compare that to charities that increased or maintained pre-pandemic fundraising levels. So that data really speaks to the opportunity of engaging youth, not just for preparing for future, but to support the health of our programs today. And the growing wealth gaps in society are definitely putting further pressure on charities to deliver services to the most vulnerable and also further concentrating wealth. We actually just did a recent poll with Ipsos Reid that we commissioned. And maybe you saw some of that because we held a press conference a couple of weeks ago. But that research showed that right now, 2 in 10 Canadians are currently relying on charities for essential needs like food and shelter, which is unconscionable in a country like Canada. So charities are fulfilling and answering some of the most pressing needs of society right now. And the wealth transfer continues to concentrate wealth unless it can be redistributed. And charities can be a vehicle for leveraging this wealth for systemic change. So in Canada, according to Environics research, approximately $1 trillion in personal wealth will be transferred from one generation to the next between 2016 and 2026, with roughly 70% of that in the form of financial assets. And that's, of course, from the boomer generation. So huge opportunity there. So I think we are going to move to a poll now, and I wanted to get a sense as to how many on the call today have already have specific strategies already implemented within your organization to engage young supporters in your mission. So I think Kylie in the back end. Okay, awesome. So there's the poll. So the question is, does your organization have specific strategies already implemented to engage young supporters? So if you could just answer the poll, yes, no, or I don't know, if you are not aware, this will actually tell us a lot. And of course, keep in mind, this doesn't need to exclusively include financial strategies to raise money. It can include volunteerism, advocacy, etc. Okay, so I just took part as well, and so I'm hoping that everyone can see these results. So it looks like the majority say no, they do not have specific strategies already implemented to engage young supporters. So this is why you're here. So great that you're here. I think we can, oh, thanks Kylie for removing the poll. So this next slide, this is a great quote from the book called Generation Impact, How Next Gen Donors Are Revolutionizing Giving. And I'll just read that quote. We need to understand the collective mindset and plans of the donors of this generation, even if we don't yet know which of these donors will be the Carnegies and Gateses of the future. They are not content to just step passively into their predecessors' shoes. They want to forge bold new paths in those shoes. They want even greater impact. So what this quote, for me, it really speaks to the fact that we need to do things differently in order to engage the next generation of change makers. And it also reminds us that we need to treat everyone equally, especially young change makers, so we can ride along their change-making journey, nurture them, and maybe one day they would have the financial wealth to make those larger gifts to our organizations. So you've heard this quote before too, hope is not a strategy. So there's this sentiment among the nonprofit sector, and probably in media as well, I have to say, that that we're just dissatisfied with the level of engagement of 18 to 30-year-olds. The way they consume content is very different than how those of us that are in the Gen X generation or Boomer generation, or even beyond that, I believe they refer to them as the silent generation. We've all learned how to consume content very, very differently. Our 2023 giving report found that actually close to half, 50% or 49% in this case, of charities are dissatisfied with the level of engagement that 18 to 30-year-olds have with their charity. Yet only 22% of those same charities say that they implemented a strategy intended to engage with those younger Canadians. So this is all to say we have to remember hope is not a strategy, and tactics have to be used to forge new paths to change. Thank you for the thumbs up. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through some of the more specific characteristics and ways that younger generations are engaging with charitable giving from our 2022 giving report. Okay, so younger generations actually maintain a higher level of trust in charities than older Canadians. I know that seems counterintuitive, but it's true. Both Gen Z, which is 71% of that cohort, and millennials, 66%, were actually more likely to report that they trust charities more than older generations. Baby boomers actually scored 63% and Gen X 64%. So the vast majority of younger Canadians actually hold very positive beliefs about charities. And more than 80% of both Gen Z and millennials agreed that charities provide value through practical solutions that help solve, the most pressing societal issues and make Canada a better place. And meanwhile, 70% of Gen Z and 68% of millennials believe that most charities are dynamic, innovative organizations that cater to society's current needs. Younger supporters feel strongly about specific causes, but that's not necessarily about your organization specifically. And that's why we say that they care more about your cause or your organizational purpose than they do about your specific organization. So, for example, they may care very deeply and passionately about climate change and support this cause in a variety of ways, like signing petitions, volunteering, going to a protest, etc. They may also donate to an environmental charity, but they don't see the donation as the only way that they are supporting the environment cause. They care so much about impact and so much about being personally involved. Learning about an issue so that they can be informed is also a very strong characteristic of the Gen Z demographic. 58% saying that they want to engage in the learning about an issue. And then talking about causes is also a key action taken to support charities across generations. But we actually saw that this was most common among younger Canadians. So 60% of Gen Z and 57% of millennials would talk about the causes most important to them, while only 53% of Gen X and 51% of baby boomers say they talk about those causes. So in terms of talking about a cause online, as we know, young Canadians are more likely to take their causes to social media, with more than 42% of Gen Z and millennials sharing or promoting causes important to them on social, compared to 37% of Gen X and only 24% of baby boomers. Younger Canadians are also more likely to take their causes to the streets. So both Gen Z and millennials were more likely to show their support through protest and in-person events, with 25%, so that's 1 in 4 of Gen Z, and 20% of millennials saying that they would do so. And I think that that has been highlighted, especially in the last few weeks of this heartbreaking Gaza situation, as you've seen. So meanwhile, 13% of Gen X and 6% of baby boomers said that that's how they support their cause. So as I said, taking to the streets, showing their support in person is very important to this younger generation. Many younger donors are also engaged in giving that's not supported by institutions. And so that's done by things like crowdfunding or mutual aid, whereby individuals actually give to individuals directly. So giving in multiple ways is very important to this group. It makes sure that they are generous in their way, but of course there is a giving gap because that type of giving is not necessarily always shown, as we talked about earlier, on that tax filer data. What we have here is actually just an example way of segmenting your audience or your donor database, if in fact you do have one. And so these are just examples where we've created personas of, your type of donor, who they represent, their propensity to give, and how engaged they are with your cause. And for each of these different personas or groups, the method of communicating, the message, and the resources that you invest would be different. And I'm not going to get into how you can segment next generational donors. That would probably have to be another webinar. But for most organizations, this would probably still only be a small portion of your overall donor base. So in this particular example, where we've got at the top of the slide, the example is Winston, who is probably the most highly engaged type of donor. He needs a lot of attention, but is prepared to possibly make a substantial gift at some point. As an organization, you may not have people like Winston in your database, and that's okay. The point here is to just ensure that you do have a segmentation strategy that takes into account the needs and wants of different donor groups. So you want to have a deliberate strategy that will reach not just the Winstons, but also in this particular example, the Henrys and the Marias of the world, and make sure you nurture them and use the appropriate level of effort for the payoff. Okay, so some proven starting points when you're looking at your current younger donors would be focusing on engagement over donation appeals in the early stage. So as we saw with some of those stats, offering up like meaningful volunteer opportunities, educational events and experiences for them to actually learn about the cause and about your organization, those would be the opportunities for younger Canadians to really, lean into that and perhaps even start lending their voice and influence as a start contribution to your organization. So it's not necessarily starting off as financial contributors. You can tailor your messaging to this group to focus on the aspect of your work that's most aligned with their values. So our research shows that young Canadians care deeply about things like social justice, the environment, and mental health. And those are those are probably already very relevant aspects in the work that you all do. But in particular, have a look at what topic areas your individual organizations have been focusing on and see how you can connect that with your younger audience. And of course, you need to connect with younger Canadians where they are and in the ways they expect. I think this is something that we all are well aware of. So your online presence, not just from your social channels, but also from your website, is critical to ensure a very smooth digital experience. And part of that is making sure that your website is optimized for a mobile experience. Because what we've seen is that younger generations are visiting websites on their phone, on their smartphones, not on desktops, the way Gen Xers like me still tend to do. And so far we've talked about how donors care about different causes and want to engage with your charity or your organization in different ways. It's important to remember that segmentation is critical in order to learn about your current young audience. And so that's what this slide is all about. Get your data in order. So segmentation isn't a new trend. Of course, in the magazine industry, you have access to a lot of data. And so it's really important to double down and address this head on, especially given the differences between generations that I've already outlined and that are outlined in the giving report. So understanding the generational differences, their giving habits, the way they consume content, and ways that they are giving is the first step. And so many of you probably already have in place, hopefully, a database or a customer relationship management system, some type of CRM system that can help you segment your supporters, capture all of that activity, and also enable you to send targeted emails to your supporters so that you can strategically communicate with them and actually get some feedback on their interests and preferences. Another interesting stat we found was that nearly all Canadians, over 80%, agreed that charities need to keep pace with digital trends and technologies to effectively carry out their missions, with 87% of Gen Z agreeing with this statement. And meanwhile, when considering engaging or supporting a charity, the ability to learn about that charity online was very important to 56% of Gen Z and 51% of millennials and Gen X, only 41% of baby boomers. So digital matters to all Canadians, but especially Gen Z, as we talked about. They truly are the first generation who has always known the internet. And so always bear that in mind. So for this reason, it is critical to step up your digital game. And that comes, we've talked about that comes in many forms, but especially when it comes to your digital presence. When we talk about actually your organizational website, if you actually have an opportunity for people to support your organization, first and foremost, check out the website and see if you have the ability to donate. Is your donate now button at the top of your website? And does it stay there on every page you move to? So in other words, is it a static button and hopefully a very bold color that's different from the rest of the color palette of the website? Is it noticeable? In terms of how you accept donations, it's also critical to embed a customized donation form onto your website so that your supporters don't leave your website before they actually make a gift. And this is just a shameless plug, but just to keep in mind that CanadaHelps offers customizable donation forms that can be embedded on your website if you are a registered charity. And I'm not sure how many folks on the call are from registered charities. And you can customize that donation form with your own branding and your own messaging. And it's all tax receivable, and CanadaHelps issues the tax receipts on your organization's behalf. Do you have a ways to give page on your website? That's also very important. If not, you need one. That could be a way to list all the different ways folks can get engaged with your organization. So how can they volunteer? Can they advocate, whether it's something as simple as signing a petition, or do you have any in-person events coming up? If you are accepting charitable donations, list out all the different ways to donate. So can they donate securities? Can they make a one-time gift? Become a monthly supporter, et cetera, et cetera. And also very important, which I know is something that a lot of organizations sort of deprioritize. It's important to optimize your search engine optimization, or your SEO, to make sure your website's actually discoverable on Google. So when it comes to those who may already know about your organization, the reality is that fewer and fewer people will bother to type in a web address, but they just go to Google and type, what they're looking for. And so some of the most popular search terms are in fact website addresses like Facebook or YouTube. but you have to make sure you've got all those keywords and every single page of your website optimized so that people searching for your organization will find you. Or if they're not searching for you specifically, anything related to what your organization does should be embedded within those pages on the back end. And if you don't know what that's all about, speak to the IT person in your organization, because I'm sure that they will be able to assist. Given that today's audience is made up of organizations representing magazines across the country, I thought I would just highlight here that monthly giving has actually proven to be a really popular trend among younger generations. And I think for those of us in the bigger cities, you've seen a lot of this face-to-face fundraising that takes place where you get stopped on the street and asked very targeted questions about causes. And the ultimate goal is really to secure monthly donors. And it works very, very well. And so what we're thinking is that there's definitely a correlation with monthly giving, along with like the monthly subscription models like Netflix, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what I've highlighted on this slide. Think of the younger generations then as a subscription generation. So when asked if making occasional large donations or smaller monthly donations were more appealing, 32% of Gen Z and 31% of millennials actually choose monthly donations, compared to 27% of Gen X and 20% of baby boomers. So monthly giving is a reliable and a stable source of secure funding. So it's critical to embedding a monthly donor strategy within your fundraising plan. And you really need to jump on this to build a year-round revenue stream for your organization. And when approaching donors, remember to emphasize the benefits of monthly giving. Donors will receive an aggregated or a rolled up tax receipt at the end of the year, making tax season super easy. It helps to plan long-term giving, and it's easy to fit into anybody's monthly budget to support those in keeping track of their finances. And donors can really approach monthly giving with a set it and forget it mentality. And I think that's really what these younger generations really care about. Once it's set up, they don't have to worry about it. And it also provides, let's face it, a feel-good feeling all year round, knowing that you're continuously supporting an organization you believe in that's making an impact and doing good. This is important as well, like critical across the board. Younger generations were more likely to report that racial inequality and supporting other marginalized groups were more important causes to them compared to the responses of older generations. So nearly 30% of Gen Z and 17% of millennials put this cause in their top 5, compared to only 11% of Gen X and 9% of baby boomers. Generation Z was more likely at 18% to select LGBTQ plus communities as important, more than any other generation, with 10% of millennials also selecting it. So in terms of generational similarities, when it comes to the differences for causes that Canadians care about, across every generation, mental health support and research was selected by actually 1/3 of all respondents as a top 5 choice. While climate change didn't crack the top 5 for Gen X, it's actually number 6. It had strong support across all generations. But Gen Z and millennials place it as the number 1 and number 2 spot respectively. So it is definitely one of the top causes. The top cause for Gen Z, the number 2 cause for millennials. So this next slide is actually very timely because Giving Tuesday is actually less than a week away. It's taking place next Tuesday, November 28th. And I think it's pretty ubiquitous by now, but for those who may not know what it is, it started in the United States. It's tied to the US Thanksgiving. And so I think we all know Black Friday is coming up this Friday, which is, a day of conspicuous consumption. And then, of course, we have Monday, which is now branded Cyber Monday, another day of online conspicuous consumption. So, Giving Tuesday was really started as a movement to reflect on, how important it is to incorporate giving into our daily lives. And so it's tied to US Thanksgiving and then these days of shopping, both in store and online, just so that people don't lose sight of the fact that not everyone has the abilities or the privilege to do all this shopping. And so that's where Giving Tuesday was born, and it's actually been around in Canada now for the last 10 years. So by and large, younger Canadians, we have found in our research, love Giving Tuesday. We see them across the country participating as community leaders. They fundraise for their favorite cause and they give. And because Giving Tuesday is more than just a day, it's really become more of a movement. Younger Canadians participate because they want to be part of something bigger and have that impact, as we talked about earlier. So even though it's coming up in less than a week, next Tuesday, it's actually not too late to get involved. So Giving Tuesday actually helps all charities become more effective fundraisers. And I'm sorry if you can hear the siren in the background. Um, Charities that actively participate in Giving Tuesday generate more than 400 times more revenue on that single day compared to non-participating charities. And these charities get 6 times more revenue from the day after Giving Tuesday through until December 31st. In fact, Giving Tuesday is now sort of seen as the unofficial start of the holiday giving season. So if you're thinking about doing something for Giving Tuesday, I highly encourage you to leverage the day. Um, and Right, and the last stat is they raise 4.2 times more from January 1st until Giving Tuesday. And each year, participating charities actually become better fundraisers. So it's a really important day. I can tell you at CanadaHelps, it's our single biggest fundraising day. Second single biggest fundraising day. The first one being December 31st, of course, which is a very important day for folks who want tax receipts. I wanted to leave you with a variation on this great quote, and it's attributed to a senior executive at IBM, and I've just changed it a little bit here, which is your donor or your supporter. Let's use that. Your supporter's last best experience anywhere is their minimum expectation everywhere. So what does that mean? Well, I think especially before everything went digital, a brand's commitment, really only commitment, was to provide value to a customer through the product or the service that they offered. However, now the new expectation is that the brand will offer value not just through the product or service, but through the experience itself that they offer. In other words, experiences are now the brand, and the brand is now the experience. So, to use a simple example, if you're a car dealer, customers aren't just evaluating how you treated them based on how they've been treated by other car dealers. They're actually comparing you with how they were treated by the amazing hotel they stayed at during their last vacation, or the beauty retailer that they shop at on a regular basis. So the ultimate test of your strategy is not how well you stack up against what your competitors in your own sector are doing, but whether or not you live up to what your customers believe you can and should be doing. And so they're constantly comparing every brand to the last best experience that they had.
I just want to make a comment, which is to say that I know that there's major behavioral and sociological differences between the generations, but it is kind of shocking to see, the disparity like this, and how it is getting actually worse, and how it's getting worse for people like you and me, and we're giving less, and that's really disturbing. So as we go into Giving Tuesday, I'm going to be thinking about that. I'm one of those people who's probably let my monthly donations slide, so I think I'll try and bring a little bit more generosity back into my life.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great to hear. Thank you, Joyce. And I
what
think COVID, we didn't even talk about COVID because I think we're all so over it, even though we know it's not over, but we're over it. But COVID has definitely had a massive impact on the charitable sector, of course, media, technology sector. Like we, in some ways, the economy has bounced back, and in other ways, things are shifting. And so we're going to continue to see that happening.
Yeah. Well, for those of us who experienced job loss during and before the pandemic, and coming to the realization that growth of our kind of portfolio is probably never going to happen, right? It's we need to maintain and be and kind of come to terms with what we have. But anyway, I'm gonna ask Tom's question, because it's relevant probably to a few people on the call, which is to say, do you have any recommendations for organizations that might manage? I know CanadaHelps doesn't, but places to go if you are doing the Guardian model where you're begging for money, where you are asking people for contributions. Um,
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, not, Tom. I'm sorry, because we are a registered charity and we facilitate donations to all 86,000 plus registered charities in Canada. Every donation is tax receivable, so we don't. But I guess you could look at other options. I mean, there's GoFundMe, for example, that enables campaigns, and if it's not directed to a registered charity, donations would not be receivable. So you can explore that, perhaps.
I liked your because when you said ways to give, you
Hmm.
mentioned a few things that are not tax receivable donations. So
That's
I
right.
think that kind of getting that into a like getting it out of your head and onto the wall, and then getting it off the wall and onto your webpage. Like, what are the ways that people can be involved in supporting, whether it's Galleries West or On Spec or Broadview? I think that those are all, that's a real great way to do that. Jocelyn, who is at Broadview Magazine, which is a client of CanadaHelps, you will know them, asks the 1 trillion that will be transferred from 2016 to 26, will that mainly be going to Gen Xers and younger boomers whose parents have died?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jocelyn. And I think some millennials are included in that as well, because older boomers are part of that wealth transfer. But you're absolutely right. That's the generation that stands to inherit this wealth.
Talk to your parents about their will. Talk to your parents.
Yeah, really important. And it's so critical. And there's actually some really good free will creation tools that are offered in Canada. And not to plug them, but I think if anybody's interested, check out willfora.ca, willfora.ca. And they actually promote free will creation for Canadians, and particularly encourage a planned gift or a bequest to a charity. So that's built into their model.
I just did that last week. It
Oh,
takes
nice.
less than 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Um,
it's super
the
easy.
conversations that I have to have with the people who are taking my cats and all my furniture are going to take longer than the will took. So
Right.
I definitely
That's right. It's
do it.
sometimes it's some challenging discussions that nobody really wants to have, but important to have.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The Diane at OnSpec just mentions that OnSpec has been doing fairly well with Patreon over the years, that it makes them enough money to buy stories and poems. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. Glad to hear that.
Yeah, I think the sort of the accountability pathway that things like Patreon give you if you're asking for money is really nice, in this context, right?
Mhm.
Lisa Whittington Hill, who's at this magazine, Red Maple Foundation, asks, with so much going on in the world and so many causes and organizations you can give to, how do you stand out amongst all the asks?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that is like the quandary of every charitable organization, that's for sure. I think being authentic, first and foremost, and being very, very clear about outlining your purpose as an organization, every chance you get is critical to that, to standing out. And the other thing is knowing how to leverage your stable database of donors, because the reality is you will likely get more revenue from your existing donors than from new ones. And so the question is, how can you spend more time engaging your repeat donors while also, of course, having an eye on acquiring new ones? But I think it's a very challenging task. And I think that's where constantly being willing to experiment and test and learn as you go has to be part of that.
Do you have any favorite newsletters or websites that you've gone to over time as you've learned the fundraising trade? I mean, most of the people in the magazine industry who do fundraising do it as part of a whole bunch of other things that they
Oh
do.
yeah, it's like off the side of your desk type
Yeah,
of thing.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would say, I mean, CanadaHelps has a blog, which I would encourage you to go to. I can I post something in the chat too?
Yes, please.
Oh, I can. Okay, good. So there's that. It's called Giving Life, which is really for donors, but then there's also one for charities called Charity Life. So let me just copy this link and I will post it. Um, and then of course, like every province has an association of fundraising professionals, or AFP. And so I would encourage you to explore maybe their website, because they often have free resources, they have newsletters you can sign up for, um, and events, of course. Sometimes they're a little bit pricey, but they do offer free resources and events too. Charity Village is another good one, charityvillage.com. They have some good resources. Um, I think provincially, there's so much for those in Ontario, like the Ontario Nonprofit Network. They really have a lot of great information.
Mhm.
So, yeah, there's a lot out there.
I I forwarded something to a colleague yesterday. The You don't have to be a client of the fundraising software to be on their newsletters.
That's
Donor
true.
Perfect has an excellent one, and yesterday they sent out a free guide to crisis management fundraising. And so, whether it's your own emergency or a world emergency, how to fundraise during that time. So, I just think there's um, if you poke around. I will say though to this group, like please let us know in the evaluation if you want us to bring you more specific content around fundraising for charities and that sort of thing, because we'll go after it.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and I'm happy to customize future presentations if you want to dig into something specific, because I know that this was really focused a bit more broadly on the charitable sector and the research we've done. So I'm happy to, do a follow up with more sort of niche topic areas.
that would be great.
Hmm.
Um, oh, Diane mentions as well for the small non-charity bags, coffee represents an option to donate the cost of a coffee. I see that a lot on YouTube actually, and
Yeah,
I'd love to see it more at the end of articles. You know,
it's a great
here's
idea.
$5. This was a pleasure to read. I think the monthly giving aspect of donor management that you talked about is really interesting. Can you talk about moving somebody from maybe who's an annual donor or an occasional donor into that monthly giving pathway? What some of the kind of top tips might be?
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, you have to, it's important to see how much someone, like what their sort of giving lifetime value, if we use donor speak, what have they given to the organization in the past or in total? Do they have the capacity to maybe take on a monthly donor or a monthly gift? And so if you feel that they do have capacity, it's really, I don't recommend every organization or every charity do this, but if you could tailor your monthly program to um, what you know your supporters are aligned to. Some organizations will actually name their monthly program. So if you
Mhm.
want to brand it, it's a great idea. You don't have to do that, but sometimes it helps people just, get their affinity to the program. And the main thing, though, is just communicating all the benefits to them, like what's in it for them. So it's going to be really easy. You don't have to worry about it. Like I mentioned earlier, you'll get a tax receipt at the end of the year with all your donations combined. You have the benefit of knowing that your total giving will contribute to, advancing the organizational mission in this way, and you spell that out. And then the other thing is sometimes, like, some organizations that I've worked with will actually quantify what the total monthly donor pool has been able to contribute. So I know it's easier to do for some organizations than others, but for example, with, let's use Sick Kids as the gold standard, which is the pediatric hospital in Toronto. Um, with their monthly donor program, I mean, the funds raised there have been able to fund like entire like wings of the hospital. So they can actually quantify where that program revenue has gone. And so if you're able to do that and actually like give people something tangible that they can understand where the contribution is going, that really helps.
I was going to ask about gifts and incentives, but it seems to me that being able to show the difference that the gift makes is really more
Yes,
important than
that's
a
right.
t-shirt or a cap or a
Yes.
signed whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
gifts and incentives like premiums,
mhm,
as they're called in the direct mail world. Yeah, those are definitely going the way of the dodo bird.
interesting.
They're not, with, understanding that climate change and the environment is like the number one, number two cause for Gen Z and millennials. They see it as very wasteful.
Yeah.
And even if it's something as simple as a notepad that an organization will send you, or like those mailing labels, they don't want to see that.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions or they want to reach out, connect, please feel free. Oh, great. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Like I said, I have a real soft spot for magazine industry and the whole media world. So, yeah, I am happy to be of service in any way, shape, or form.